January 28, 2024, 6:18 a.m. local time. At the American base known as Tower 22, a logistics outpost in the Badlands of northeastern Jordan, nestled against the Syrian border. The radars are active. The air defense systems are online. The operators are at their stations. Every sensor, every camera, every antenna spinning in the dark of the desert. Everything is working. And then, in 14 seconds, 3 American soldiers are dead. It's not an airstrike with dozens of aircraft. It's not a ballistic missile bombardment. It's a single drone. A single drone that pierced the protective bubble of the most expensive air defense infrastructure in human history and delivered its lethal payload while the systems around it kept operating, kept spinning, kept alive. Think about that for a second. There was air defense at Tower 22. There were active radars. There were trained operators. There were rules of engagement. And yet, 3 Americans died. More than 40 were injured. And the base that was supposed to be protected by the most advanced defense architecture on the planet was hit by a single low-cost projectile operated by a proxy militia. There is a question that Pentagon intelligence analysts have been quietly asking since that day. It's not a rhetorical question. It's not a theoretical exercise. It's a question that defines the future of the American military presence in the Middle East, and possibly how any major power will conduct defense operations in the coming decades. How did a single Iranian drone penetrate a fully operational American air defense system in 14 seconds? Hold on to that question. Because for over a year, the official answer was vague. The dominant narrative blamed operational fatigue, the sheer volume of attacks, statistical inevitability. And for over a year, the real question remained unanswered. Dissolved in vague briefings, buried in classified reports, ignored by surface-level analysis that prefers simple stories over disturbing mechanisms, until the data leaked. In January 2025, a set of internal documents and reports began circulating in the corridors where national security is discussed. And what this data reveals isn't a technical radar failure. It's not a system that was offline. What this data reveals is a 14-second window, precise, intentional, architected with months of preparation, that Iran exploited not with brute force, but with something far more dangerous than force. Deception. Stay with me here, because I need you to stay until the end of this video, because I'm going to reveal the specific move that Iran executed, a move that doesn't show up in the headlines, that no media outlet has fully unpacked. And once you understand the mechanism, you'll understand why Tower 22 wasn't an accident, wasn't luck, wasn't a statistical anomaly. It was a rehearsal. In the days following the attack on Tower 22, the dominant narrative quickly solidified. Iran used Iraqi proxies. The volume of attacks, 183 over 4 months, finally yielded a hit. A matter of probability, a matter of saturation. Enough drones in the air, and one of them will get through. That is the story almost every television analyst repeated, that almost every headline confirmed, that almost every security report adopted as the standard explanation. This explanation is logical, it's intuitive, and it is fundamentally wrong. That's not what the data shows. Think of it this way. If Tower 22 were a saturation problem, the pattern of the 183 previous attacks would have progressively escalated in intensity. More drones per wave, more simultaneity, more pressure on the radars. Each attack would have been a genuine attempt to cause damage, and the logic would be simple. Enough quantity eventually overcomes defensive quality. But the pattern didn't work like that. The previous 183 attacks were consistently calculated to stay below the threshold of American casualties, not out of operational inability, by deliberate strategic choice. Each one carefully scaled to hit infrastructure, to create operational costs, to demand a defensive response, but not to kill Americans. Because killing Americans before the right moment would have triggered an American response that would have destroyed the vulnerability window Iran was patiently building. And here is the twist that changes the entire analysis. What penetrated Tower 22 in 14 seconds wasn't an overwhelming strike. It was a precise maneuver. A single drone that traveled along the exact same flight corridor an American drone was using to return to base, hiding in the electronic and physical slipstream of the ally, invisible not because it was stealthy, but because it looked friendly. This isn't a hardware problem. It's not a radar problem. It's not even a problem of how many interceptor missiles were available. It is a protocol problem. And this is where the story begins to reveal something much more disturbing than a simple security failure. Because the protocol Iran exploited isn't an accidental weakness in the American system. It's a deliberate safeguard, built to protect American lives from friendly fire. A safeguard that in 14 seconds became the attack vector. In the language of intelligence, this has a precise name. It's called security protocol exploitation. And it's one of the most sophisticated types of attacks that exists, because you aren't attacking the adversary's capability. You are attacking the logic that governs when that capability is authorized to fire. So, the right question isn't, why didn't the missiles intercept the drone? The right question is, why didn't the system authorize the launch in time? Now let's talk about what the leaked data actually says, because the precise mechanics are exactly what all the major media outlets failed to unpack. The documents that began circulating in January 2025 identify a specific window in the detect, decide, and engage cycle of the American air defense at Tower 22. That window is exactly 14 seconds. And those 14 seconds are not a coincidence. They're not a rounded approximation. They are the calculable duration of a process, with 3 distinct phases that happen in sequence, and which together create a corridor of vulnerability that can be exploited by any actor who knows the protocol intimately enough. The leak doesn't just name the outcome, it names the mechanism. And this fundamentally matters because there is a difference between knowing a system failed and knowing exactly where in the decision cycle the failure happens. The first is a conclusion. The second is a recipe. What the documents describe is an air defense system that was technically functional across all measurable parameters. The radars detected the drone. The systems registered the object's presence. The defense architecture was online. But between the moment the radar painted the target and the moment a human operator could have authorized the engagement, the drone had already closed to lethal distance. 14 seconds. That isn't a number that suggests operational incompetence. It's a number that reveals the precise geometry of a structural vulnerability. A vulnerability that wasn't in Tower 22's electronic systems, but in the decision protocol that governs when those systems are authorized to act. And the leaked documents suggest something even more disturbing. Iran knew this geometry in advance. Not because they had access to classified Pentagon secrets, but because they spent 4 months measuring it in real time, attack by attack, response by response, second by second. The complete answer on how they measured this geometry is coming shortly. But first, it's necessary to understand the full mechanical sequence of those 14 seconds. Because when you look at each component in isolation, each one seems reasonable, each one seems necessary. When you see them together, in sequence, the vulnerability becomes not just understandable, it becomes inevitable. Sit down, because from here on out, every detail matters. The air defense system at Tower 22 operates around a set of interdependent protocols. Among them, the most relevant to what happened on January 28th is the IFF, Identify Friend or Foe. It's an electronic transponder system that works like an aerial password. Every Allied aircraft continuously transmits a coded electronic signature that Allied defense systems recognize as friendly. When a radar detects any flying object, the system immediately runs an IFF query. Is this object broadcasting the right code? If yes, friendly aircraft. Do not engage. Life saved. If no, potential threat. Engagement protocol initiates. This system exists because friendly fire kills American soldiers just as much as enemy projectiles do. And in the complexity of a combat airspace, with American drones, Allied planes, medevac helicopters, and civilian commercial aircraft all operating in overlap, the ability to distinguish friend from foe in milliseconds is one of the most critical issues of any air defense operation. On the afternoon of January 28, 2024, there was an American drone returning to base at Tower 22. An operational drone, completing its mission, transmitting the correct IFF code, following its established return trajectory. A known object, a friendly object, and then, flying right behind it, camouflaged in its electronic and physical wake, positioned in a way to exploit the ambiguity that two objects on a close vector create for IFF query systems, was another drone. This second drone did not belong to the United States. It belonged to Kataib Hezbollah, an Iraqi militia backed and coordinated by Iran. And it was flying in a very specific way, not just approaching the target, but overlapping its trajectory with the returning American drone, creating a window where the IFF query would return ambiguous information instead of a clear negative. Here is the precise mechanical sequence. Memorize this. Phase 1. Detection. The radar paints two objects on a close trajectory. One clearly transmits a friendly IFF code. The second presents an ambiguous IFF reading, partially masked by the first one's signature, not clearly hostile, not clearly friendly. The system detected an anomaly, but not an unequivocal threat. Estimated duration of this phase, 0 to 3 seconds after entering the engagement envelope. Phase 2. Repeated IFF query. The system cannot engage an ambiguous target without resolving the ambiguity. The risk of friendly fire is real and prohibited by engagement protocols. So the system runs additional IFF queries in an attempt to get a definitive reading. Each additional query takes time. And while the system queries, the ambiguous object keeps moving toward the base at attack speed. Estimated duration, 3 to 8 seconds. Phase 3. Human authorization. This is where the American rules of engagement require an element that no algorithm, no artificial intelligence, and no automation can replace within the current doctrinal framework. A human operator must receive the potential threat reading, assess the complete operational context, and authorize the engagement before any interceptor is launched. In any real combat scenario, with operational noise, incomplete information, two objects partially overlapping on a radar screen, and one of them appearing to be an allied drone returning from a mission. This human assessment and authorization process has a minimum duration that cannot be compressed below certain physiological and cognitive limits. Estimated duration, 8 to 14 seconds. By the time authorization was finally possible, the drone had already crossed into detonation range. The arithmetic is brutal in its simplicity. 3 seconds of ambiguous detection, 5 seconds of unresolved IFF querying, 6 seconds of the human authorization cycle, 14 seconds in total. And in 14 seconds, at a 150 kilometers per hour on a low-altitude attack trajectory, an attack drone closes the distance by over 580 meters. At Tower 22, 580 meters was enough. Now understand what this means in practical terms. The system was not hacked. The radar was not blinded. No electronic equipment was destroyed or jammed prior to the strike. The protocol worked exactly as it was designed to work. With all identification safeguards activated, the human decision loop preserved, and friendly fire protection systems intact and operational. And yet, 3 Americans died. This is not a hardware failure. This is an architectural exploit. These 183 attacks did not fail. They succeeded, just not in the way the Pentagon reported. Between October 7, 2023 and January 27, 2024, on 113 days, 183 attacks on American bases in Iraq and Syria, 0 Americans killed. 0. During a period of continuous pressure, with frequent strikes against American military infrastructure across the region, the American fatality rate was 0. The conventional explanation: the defense systems worked magnificently. The interceptors did their job. Iran lacked the capability to penetrate American defenses. The correct explanation, in light of the leaked data, they weren't trying to cause casualties yet. Within the strategic vocabulary, there is a concept that planners call calibration attacks. Low lethality operations deliberately limited in scope, executed not with the goal of destroying, but with the goal of learning, mapping, and measuring. Every calibration attack generates a highly valuable data set. How fast does the defense system respond to the alarm? What is the flight pattern of American drones during that time window? At what times of the day are alerts triggered most frequently? When are the operators most fatigued? At dawn, after double shifts, or following weeks of intermittent alerts without adequate rest? 183 attacks. 183 datasets collected in real time, each of them refining a predictive model of American operational behavior under sustained pressure. There is a fundamental difference between knowing theoretically how an air defense protocol works on paper and having empirically observed how it behaves under real combat conditions, with real operators, on real shifts, after months of continuous alerts that frequently end without incident. Theory tells us the design. Observation shows us the seams. The 183 attacks produced the target profile that enabled the January 28th strike. They identified the flight pattern of American drones at Tower 22. They mapped the alert and stand-down cycles. They measured response times under multiple conditions. And when this data was aggregated and analyzed, it revealed a specific window, a 14-second window, that could be exploited with the right IFF spoofing maneuver. Keep this concept of calibration in mind, because it reappears later in this video on a completely different scale. What Iran had been building over 4 months was not simply political pressure or operational costs. It was a precise predictive model of American behavior under sustained attrition. And when this model was complete enough to pinpoint the window of vulnerability, those 14 seconds, the fatal attack was executed with surgical strategic precision. It wasn't luck, it was engineering. And this is the point that alters the meaning of the entire operation. Pay close attention now, because this is the revelation that no media coverage has managed to articulate clearly. What killed 3 American soldiers at Tower 22 wasn't a drone. It wasn't an explosive. It wasn't an electronic failure or a deficient system. What killed 3 Americans was a protocol. Read that again. An American safety protocol, built specifically to protect American lives from friendly fire, was weaponized by Iran into the attack vector. The safeguard became the vulnerability. The system meant to protect became the mechanism by which protection was prevented from acting. This isn't a technical flaw that a systems engineer can fix with a firmware update. It's not a software bug that a patch can resolve. It is a structural vulnerability in the DNA of the American decision-making process, in the doctrinal axiom that every lethal authorization must pass through a human being before being executed. In advanced military doctrine, what Iran executed has a precise classification: an attack on the decision architecture, not on the defense hardware, not on the radar software, on the logic that governs when the system is authorized to act. Think of it this way. Imagine a safe with the most sophisticated combination ever built. No one can guess the combination. No one can force the door with explosives. The steel is perfect. The electronics are impenetrable. But the security protocol requires a manager to authorize every opening of the safe, and it takes 14 seconds to contact the manager, notify them, and get authorization. So you don't need to break the safe. You just need to act within 14 seconds. That is exactly what happened at Tower 22. And the direct consequence that defense analysts have been quietly discussing ever since is this: you cannot solve this problem with more Patriot missiles. You cannot solve it with higher resolution radars. You cannot solve it with more interceptors in the inventory or with better trained operators. Because the problem lies neither in the detection capability nor in the interception capability. The problem lies in the window between detection and authorization. And this window exists because it must exist, for legal, ethical, and operational reasons deeply rooted in American doctrine. Because the alternative fully autonomous air defense systems that fire without human confirmation creates friendly fire risks that American planners themselves consider unacceptable. Iran didn't discover an accidental weakness in the American system. Iran discovered that the American system's greatest doctrinal strength, its commitment to human control over lethal decisions, its refusal to delegate the authorization to kill to a machine, is at the same time its most exploitable vulnerability in operations where the margin of time is measured in seconds. This isn't a question about missile technology or radar capacity. This is a question about doctrine, about the values that doctrine embodies. And doctrines that embody fundamental values aren't updated with a software patch. Now let's talk about what happened 3 months after Tower 22. Because what Iran did in April 2024 confirms that Tower 22 was not an exception. It was a proof of concept. On April 13th and 14, 2024, Iran executed Operation True Promise, the first direct attack from Iranian territory against Israeli territory in history. Over 300 projectiles, long-range drones, cruise missiles, hypersonic ballistic missiles. A massive coordinated wave of multiple vectors, multiple speeds, and multiple trajectories arriving from multiple directions. Israel, with American, British, and Jordanian support, intercepted approximately 99% of the projectiles. The verdict most Western analysts drew from this operation was the following: an overwhelming victory for the defense. Iran tried to attack Israel directly, and practically all the projectiles were shot down, a demonstration of the superiority of multi-layered defense. Hold that judgment, because it is exactly the kind of conclusion Iranian doctrine counts on you drawing. The 300 projectiles were not sent with the primary objective of destroying Israel. They were sent to execute 4 missions simultaneously. First, to demonstrate range, volume, and multi-vector coordination capabilities to the world. Second, to force the activation of multiple layers of air defense: THAAD, Patriot, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, Iron Dome, and record in detail the response of each one, their activation times, their target prioritization patterns, their capacity limits per layer. Third, to consume highly expensive interceptors that take months to replace. Fourth, to operationally prove that coordinated pressure across multiple theaters is sustainable without triggering a decisive American response. A 1% penetration rate across 300 projectiles means that about 3 projectiles got through, but that number hides what really matters: the cost of intercepting the other 297. Each Patriot PAC-3 interceptor costs between $2 and $4 million. Each Arrow 3 missile costs over $2 million. A single Iranian Shahed long-range drone cost between $10,000 and $50,000. Now do the math. This is the logic of non-binary saturation that Iranian doctrine applies. Not to win on the battlefield, to drain, to exhaust. Not to destroy American defense, but to turn American defense itself into a depletion mechanism for the interceptor inventory, with every wave, every alert cycle, every operation calculated to stay below the threshold of a decisive response. And alongside the equipment cost, there is the human cost that is rarely accounted for adequately in public reports: alert fatigue. 183 attacks over 4 months mean that the operators at Tower 22 spent more than an entire quarter in a continuous state of high alert. Every alarm, every partially canceled alert, every night of fragmented sleep imperceptibly reduces the speed of response, the accuracy of judgment, the speed of engagement authorization. In systems where 14 seconds is the margin between effective defense and disaster, alert fatigue is not a human resources management problem. It is a weapon. Now let's shift to the maritime dimension. Because what happened at Tower 22 and what is happening in the Red Sea are not 2 distinct stories, they are one. Since October 2023, Yemen's Houthi forces, armed, trained, equipped, and coordinated by Iran, have executed a systematic harassment campaign against commercial and naval shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the 18-mile-wide water corridor connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Approximately 12% of global trade by volume passes through this corridor. The Houthi attacks are not sinking American aircraft carriers. They are not destroying naval fleets. They aren't trying to win a decisive naval battle, because a decisive naval battle against the US Navy would result in the immediate and total destruction of Houthi naval capabilities. They are forcing repositioning. They are forcing consumption. Every Houthi attack forces American warships to activate defense systems, consume high-cost interceptors, and maintain high alert during operations that stretch on for weeks. Every route diversion that commercial shipping companies execute to avoid the Red Sea adds days to the journey via the Cape of Good Hope, driving up fuel costs, increasing delivery times, and above all, skyrocketing maritime insurance premiums. In some high-risk corridors, these premiums increased by a factor of 10 or more during the peak of the Houthi campaign. This isn't separate from Tower 22. It's the same operational equation executed in a different theater. Iran is simultaneously conducting a terrestrial attrition campaign in Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, and a maritime attrition campaign in the Red Sea via proxy. Not to win decisive battles in either theater, but to force the United States to defend 2 theaters at once, with interceptor inventories that were not designed for sustained depletion across multiple simultaneous fronts. In Pentagon strategy manuals, this is known as dual theater contestation, and it is one of the most difficult positions to sustain operationally, because every resource allocation in one theater comes at the expense of the other, and because the adversary who chose this strategy has the advantage of choosing where and when to apply pressure, while the defender must be prepared at all points at all times. The trap of the proportional response is not the weakness of a single commander. It is the architecture of the alliance itself. When the United States considered a response to the attack at Tower 22, they encountered a set of constraints that were not the product of military incompetence or a lack of will. They were the product of the political geometry of the theater of operations. Jordan is an allied state with extraordinary domestic sensitivities at an extraordinarily delicate time. King Abdullah II rules a country with a majority Palestinian population, in a context where the conflict in Gaza has generated unprecedented public pressure on any Arab leader perceived as facilitating American military operations in the region. A large-scale American response launched from Jordanian soil would have jeopardized the stability of the very alliance that allowed the American presence at Tower 22. So the response was proportional. American airstrikes against militia, infrastructure in Iraq and Syria, precise, limited, calculated to signal resolve without escalating. Exactly the kind of response that Iran's non-binary escalation doctrine anticipated, planned to survive, and used as confirmation that the strategy of sustained attrition below the threshold of a decisive response was working. There is yet another level of structural sophistication that the leaked documents highlight. Kataib Hezbollah, the Iraqi militia group that operationally executed the Tower 22 attack functions as a proxy layer separating Iran itself from direct and unequivocal attribution. The United States could strike the militia. It could not strike Iran directly without crossing an escalation threshold that no ally in the region was prepared to support, and that the American administration itself was unwilling to cross at that moment. What Iran built with Kataib Hezbollah is exactly analogous to what it built with the 14-second window, an operational distance between intent and response authorization. At the tactical level, the distance is 14 seconds in the engagement authorization cycle. At the strategic level, the distance is the proxy layer separating Iranian action from a direct proportional American response. The same vulnerability, two radically different scales. The math isn't classified, it's public. And what it says is that the United States cannot sustain this operational tempo across so many simultaneous theaters without reaching a depletion threshold that changes what deterrence means in practice. Let's follow the numbers. At the peak of operations from October 2023 to early 2024, American forces were maintaining active air defense at bases in Iraq and Syria, Tower 22 in Jordan, support for Israeli air defense during escalation operations, and continuous naval operations in the Red Sea with multiple destroyers in combat readiness. Each of these theaters consumes interceptors at a real operational pace, not in a theoretical exercise, but in active defense against live projectiles. Shored systems have depletion rates measured in weeks under sustained high-intensity operations. Patriot interceptors have resupply timelines measured in months, because each interceptor is a complex system involving an industrial production chain, not off-the-shelf inventory. There is a concept military planners call a multi-theater resource window, the time frame between when a system's interceptor stockpiles fall below the minimum operational level and when resupplies actually reach the front lines. During this window, defensive capabilities are compromised, not in a catastrophic, highly visible way, in a quiet, incremental, and cumulative way. Just enough to widen that 14-second window to 20 seconds, to 30, to 40. Because more fatigued operators, systems with lower redundancy of available interceptors, and bases with narrower safety margins simply don't process authorization cycles at the same speed as fully operational bases. Iran's doctrine doesn't need to destroy American systems. It just needs to create the conditions where the vulnerability window expands enough for the next operation to be executed, with an even higher probability of success. And the leaked data doesn't just reveal the mechanism of the past, it projects the mechanism of the future. What they describe as an emerging IRGC capability are autonomous drone swarms with built-in IFF spoofing logic. Not a single drone exploiting the return path of an American drone, but dozens of them simultaneously, each calibrated to the specific vulnerability window of the target's defense system, operating in distributed coordination without the need for real-time centralized control. The geometry of Tower 22 on a swarm scale. This isn't futuristic speculation. It's the natural evolutionary logic of a doctrine that has already proven to work with surgical precision once before. Now, let's go back to the question this video started with. It wasn't just, what happened at Tower 22? The question was, how did a single Iranian drone penetrate a fully operational American air defense system in 14 seconds? And the answer provided by the leaked data is uncomfortable for those who prefer simple explanations. The drone didn't penetrate the system because the system failed. It penetrated because the system worked exactly as it was designed to. And this operational logic contains a structural window that can be accurately measured, patiently mapped, and exploited by any actor with enough methodology to conduct 183 calibration attacks before the final strike. Tower 22 was proof that this window exists. Operation True Promise was proof that the same logic scales to scenarios with 300 projectiles and multi-layered defenses. The Red Sea campaign is proof that the doctrine operates simultaneously across multiple theaters, draining capacity on each front while keeping the adversary in a reactive mode across all of them. And this brings us to the question the leaked documents deliberately leave open, the question that defines what comes next. Was the American forward operating architecture, advanced logistics bases in high-tension zones, reliant on human authorization loops for every lethal decision, supplied by replacement chains measured in months, designed for the kind of threat it now faces? It's not a rhetorical question. There are 3 indicators analysts are monitoring as signs of the next move. First, the frequency and complexity of IRGC drone swarm exercises. If coordinated autonomous drone exercises increase in frequency and technical sophistication, the doctrine is actively being scaled to its second generation. Second, announcements regarding IFF protocol reforms or changes to the rules of engagement for air defense systems by the Pentagon. Any public change to this protocol is an indirect confirmation that the vulnerability at Tower 22 has been acknowledged at a doctrinal level and that the system is trying to adapt. Third, changes in the posture and positioning of forward American bases in Jordan and Iraq. If forward positions like Tower 22 are consolidated, repositioned, or reduced in their footprint, it's because American planners are recalculating the cost-benefit analysis of forward positions in the face of a doctrine that knows exactly how to exploit their geometry. What the data projects is that the 14-second window wasn't the final destination of Iranian doctrinal engineering. It was the starting point of an ongoing iteration. Right now, no public reform of the IFF protocol has been announced. No documented and confirmed change in the posture of forward bases in the region has been made public. No IRGC swarm exercise has been publicly and definitively attributed to second-generation IFF spoofing capabilities at scale. As an old analytical rule dictates, absence of confirmation is not confirmation of absence. What the data shows is that Tower 22 was the proof of concept for a doctrine that scales. And the question isn't whether Iran will try to replicate the mechanism. The question is whether the American architecture will be different enough so that the next attempt finds a window that no longer opens. Right now, that question remains unanswered. What to watch for as indicators in the coming weeks and months is now in your hands. You have the mechanism, you have the doctrine, you have the numbers. Keep watching, stay informed. Because this story is far, very far from over.